Pull up a chair by the hearth.
Hearthstone was developed by Blizzard Entertainment and released in March of 2014. The game had a substantial soft release prior to this in 2013, with millions of people playing the game in both closed and open beta before the official launch. Hearthstone is both a card game and a video game. This may seem like a strange distinction to make, but often people focus on the card part more than the video game. To say that Hearthstone is just a card game because it has cards in it would be like saying that Rocket League is a racing game because it has cars in it. Hearthstone is also the latest golden goose to be a runaway success for Blizzard, now that their old one, World of Warcraft, has started violently spraying diarrhea between its golden eggs. As of May of this year, there were over 30 million Hearthstone accounts. This video will explore all aspects about the game, but will have a sharp focus on the current state of its gameplay and how Blizzard is managing it. It will be split into 4 distinct parts, and I highly recommend that you watch them in order. It is not necessary to play Hearthstone in order to understand this video, although you may get more out of it if you have. The game's tutorial is, in my opinion, excessively long, but does a good job at introducing the basics of the game. A quick summary for those who haven't played. There are 2 types of cards, minions and spells. Minions are played and put on the board and become active during your next turn. Spells have an immediate effect when played. The goal is to use these minions and spells in order to reduce your opponent's health from 30 to 0. In my Diablo 3 video, I listed off the things that Blizzard seems to prioritize in their games. The things Hearthstone does well further solidifies the accuracy of this list and shows that Blizzard will put a lot of effort into making something work as long as they deem it important. Hearthstone stands as proof of Blizzard's design trifecta: accessibility, presentation, and game feel. The game looks wonderful, it's bright, colorful, and the cards are the perfect size to get a good look at the art and the text explaining what each one does. Once they're put on the board, they still look good in their clean ovals that can be altered to quickly and easily identify the type of power that each minion might have. There are little differences in class cards, creature cards, and spells. The game is by no means a graphical powerhouse, but it doesn't need to be. The effects are as simple as the idea behind the game, and it works beautifully. The music is catchy and also suits the tone of the game. All cards have some sort of sound effect or voice announcement when they're played and removed from the board. It continues the charming details that Blizzard usually puts into their games.
The end is coming! I knew it!
The game's menus are fairly large and easy to navigate. The card collection is probably the weakest part of the interface, with it becoming cluttered with so few cards on each page, but it's a necessary evil to keep the cards large enough to be comfortably read. During matches, Blizzard's devotion to making their games feel natural to play really shines through. Cards will enlarge when they're moused over, you can whip them easily around the screen, they're placed with a satisfying slam and can even be quickly flicked onto the board from your hand when you get experience with playing. Spells transition smoothly from a card to a target arrow and then into the animation itself. Targeting minions and heroes feels great, and after dozens of hours playing, I don't think there was ever a single time that the game misinterpreted what I was trying to do. During your turn, the game prioritizes your inputs over animations. You can queue in quite a long number of moves in a row, and in most cases, you don't have to wait for each card to cycle through. Unfortunately, this is also the area in the game's overall feel that I can find a flaw. Some animations are way too long and can make a player stumble or lose valuable time. There's also the potentially game-breaking issue that animations caused by your opponent have to play out in real time and in order, even after their turn is done, which can cut into your turn time. This problem stands in strange, stark contrast to the level of care otherwise put into making the game feel fantastic. There are several different boards that act as backgrounds when playing the game. These have no effect on the card matches themselves, but each have their own unique set of interactable toys in each corner. So far, a new board has been included with each major update to the game, and I don't think I'm speaking only for myself when I say that these were one of my favorite things when I first tried Hearthstone. They give you something to do while waiting for your opponent to make their turn, or provide a good repetitive task to absently click through while you think. The new board that came out with the recent expansion, the Grand Tournament, is my favorite. Hearthstone is based on World of Warcraft, and I think it's funny that some of Blizzard's bias over the Horde and the Alliance, the 2 playable factions in WoW, can be seen in their respective boards in this game. You can trash Stormwind completely, with every corner having something to ruin and break apart, yet on the Orgrimmar board, there's literally nothing to destroy, not even the patch on the blimp here or the top of the tent rock. The game's rules are simple, and although I said a moment ago that the tutorial is overly long, it is necessary for players who are unfamiliar with card games. Newcomers can still be overwhelmed, but the game's basic decks provide a good starting point to get right to matches without having to dig through all of the options available to you at the start. New class cards are introduced the more you play and give you steady rewards and a reason to keep playing, while simultaneously showing the concept of requiring new tools and modifying your decks to use them. You're incentivized into trying new classes through the system since leveling up is quick at this stage and you're getting new cards to play with. Finally, giving players easy ways to get their few packs introduces the thrill of getting new cards. This ties in perfectly with game feel and presentation. Blizzard knows that opening card packs is something that many will ritualize. You can hover over each unturned card and get a preview of what it is. You can wonder about what card it might be if it has a purple or orange glow. I'd go as far as to say that opening and collecting the cards is arguably better and more exciting and polished than Hearthstone matches themselves. You play games to get cards, not get cards to play games. A more complex explanation of Hearthstone requires defining several terms commonly used in the game. As simple as the summary was earlier, there is more to matches than aimlessly smashing your opponent down from 30 to dead, even for decks specifically designed to do that as fast as possible. Resources come in several different forms. The two that are the most easily identifiable are mana crystals and the cards themselves. Each turn you gain a new crystal up to a maximum of 10. 10 is also the cap of how many cards you can hold in your hand at any time. Each deck starts with 30 cards that you choose and build before queuing to play another person or the game's AI in practice mode. So to run through it quickly, on turn 1 you only have 1 mana crystal, on turn 2 you have 2 mana crystals, and so on all the way up to turn 10. If you go first, you start off with 3 cards and then draw one when your first turn begins. If you go second, you get 4 cards plus the coin, which is an attempt to balance the game so whoever goes first doesn't have a huge advantage. Decks in Hearthstone can be built with different strategies in mind. You can try and rush down your opponent in the fewest amount of turns as possible. This is called an aggro deck, or a face rush deck. Or you can try to control the board by consistently killing any minions your opponent plays, while trying to get high value from all of your cards. Value being found in using only one of your cards in order to neutralize 2 or more that your opponent used. There are combo decks which utilize multiple cards that synergize so well that they are far more powerful together than they are individually. Active minions on the board are another resource, and this is usually where the meat of the gameplay in Hearthstone is found. Whoever controls the board is usually going to win the game, and so wildly damaging your opponent's face without tailoring your entire deck around that purpose will rarely result in victory. Expanding on these fundamentals, it should be clear that certain cards are going to be better in certain situations. Specifically, having cards that cost the same amount of mana that you have available each turn will be the most effective way of spending those resources. If on turn 3, the only card you can play costs 2 mana, then you have just wasted 1 mana that was available to you. Cards become significantly more powerful the more they cost, so having cards that spend all of your mana like this is often the best way to play. This is called playing on curve, or having cards that curve well. This is an important definition to know for this video, so if you remember anything from this overview of the game, try to make it that. Matches will unfold with players utilizing these resources in an attempt to control the board and then push forward to kill their opponent. They will draw cards and decide the best way to use them in order to get the most value out of each one, and push for the greatest advantage and then win the game. Early games will play like this, when you are new and matched against other new players. The decisions you make will matter and there will be a sort of tug of war over the board, with minions being plopped down and spells used to support them. It's genuinely fun and shows how good the game can be, but this section is called the bad.
I concede.
The most important resource in Hearthstone is both hidden and uncontrollable: luck. Random effects, which I will now on refer to as RNG, random number generator, have a greater influence on games than anything else. Whether that's a good thing or not is ultimately up for you to decide, and we'll be discussing that in a little bit, but for now I want to show some examples that prove how much of the game is determined by luck. Playing Hearthstone is governed by 7 layers of chance. They are as follows: what quests you receive each day, can a new player effectively complete them, and how much gold did they reward? This leads to how many card packs you can acquire. What cards did you get from those packs? What class cards? What rarity are they? Are they some of the more powerful ones? Did you get any that you can disenchant for a high amount of dust in order to craft good cards? Are you capable of building a viable deck with the cards you have gotten? Not all classes and cards are equal. You queue into a game. What class are you pitted against? Does your opponent have class cards that are effective at countering the deck you are running? You know the class, but what kind of deck are they playing, even ignoring the class cards they might have? Is it aggro, control, or combo? How does your deck stack up against that? What cards do you both draw? Do you draw into a good mana curve? Does your opponent? Minions aren't even on the board yet, and already one of you might have been randomly given an advantage through the cards you have been given. Finally, what are the random results of those cards? Minions like Knife Juggler, Flame Waker, Piloted Sky Shredder, how do these luck-based mechanics change the match? You can purchase card packs with real money. We'll get to that later, but it's important to note that you can buy your way around those first 3 layers of chance, to the point that some people watching this might think they're irrelevant. I disagree, since I believe that the vast majority of players do not have a full collection of cards, but will be focusing on the final 4 layers regardless. At this point, I want to make it clear that I believe Hearthstone is a deeply broken game. The two main issues are a complete lack of balance between the 9 classes and the heavy reliance on RNG in order to create the illusion of gameplay depth instead of carefully designed game systems. In order to explain how damaging RNG is on the game, I need to explain how the metagame in Hearthstone works. Many games have a meta that is formed largely by trends and reactions to them. For a specific in Hearthstone, there was a deck called Patron Warrior that was by far and away the best deck for the past 6 months. Because of its dominance, most decks needed to keep the existence of Patron Warrior in mind when they were being built. Patron could win a lot of games by countering minions with low attack values, so while Patron reigned over the meta, many decks that use low-cost minions with these low attack numbers were considerably weaker than they were before the Patron deck was added to the game. Patron was nerfed while I was making this video. For those unfamiliar, a nerf is when something in a game has its power level reduced. Patron is no longer the best deck, and so the meta has shifted to allow the decks with a lot of weak minions to come back. Secret Paladin is now considered to be the top dog, and there are many decks that are being played in reaction to this. So, from here, we can see that there is something close to a rock, paper, scissors dynamic. You can play Secret Paladin, which is strong against a lot of decks, but now people are playing decks made specifically to counter that, like Face Hunter, and then another deck will come along that will try to be strong against both Face Hunter and Secret Paladin, but is weak to many others because of it. There's a ranking system in the game, 25 ranks all the way to Legend, with different monthly rewards for how high you get. It's virtually impossible for a new player to create their own deck that can effectively navigate the metagame. Even if they could, they would still need to be aware of the meta while doing so, and if they did create a strong deck, it would likely become part of the meta and it would shift to react to it. The point I'm trying to make is that no matter what deck you play, every time you queue into a match there's a chance you're going to be pitted against an opponent that has a deck that counters yours, or that you counter them. Depending on the specifics, you might be looking at anywhere from a 30% to 70% favor chance of winning, and this is before you've drawn any cards and put any minions into play. Following that, you could draw into a curve that leaves you helpless for the first few turns. Even playing a deck that was brimming with cards that cost less than 4 mana, I have played multiple games that I have literally not been able to play a single card until turn 4. In contrast to this, your opponent could draw into a curve that gives him cards with the exact mana crystals he has available each turn. These aren't decisions, there's no way to play or prevent this from happening, it's a random part of the game. Some of you might be saying that this is the nature of a card game. Drawing cards is always going to be random, and certain strategies having card counters is a part of many games. And you're definitely right, and if this was all the RNG that Hearthstone used, then this video probably wouldn't exist, but sadly, it gets worse. Most classes only have one truly viable deck. There might be some variations on the same concept, but the soul of each one remains the same. Some lucky classes have 2 or 3, while others arguably don't have a single one. So many games will be against the same decks over and over. I'm not sure if Blizzard intentionally designed their game this way, but it appears to me that instead of having to balance multiple classes and decks in order to add variety to their game, that they instead designed many powerful cards with huge luck-based outcomes that alter the course of each match instead. This gives the illusion of variety between each game. For examples, you have cards like Knife Juggler that throw out 1 damage knives every time you spawn a minion. Most decks in Hearthstone are aggro based, meaning that they go for the opponent's throat while trading on the board when a high value opportunity presents itself. Many matches never get past turn 8, and very often the victor wins long before then in the early game. Whoever gets the best opening and claims the board on turn 3 or 4 will usually be able to push through and win. Knife Juggler is a 2 mana card, and the knives it throws can sometimes hit your opponent's face, or they can hit their minions and clear the board for you. It's no exaggeration that these knives can often win a game. Piloted Shredder, the best 4-drop in the game, will spawn a random 2 mana cost minion when it is killed, including Knife Juggler, funnily enough. Sometimes a powerful minion will drop out of a Shredder, sometimes a minion better than the Shredder itself, which means you got a massive amount of value for just 4 mana. Or something useless could come out, or a taunted minion that can ruin your opponent's plan, or a Doomsayer that will wipe the entire board clear and act as a reset, usually to the great benefit of only one of the players. Cards like Implosion have massive swings in power, deal 4 damage and spawn 4 minions, or only deal 2 damage and spawn only 2 minions. Bane of Doom can summon a 1 mana useless imp or a 9 mana powerhouse that can single-handedly win a game. The same goes for Ram Wrangler or Unstable Portal, which can give you literally any minion card in the game and often allow you to win right there on the spot. These aren't the only cards that are like this, and not all of them are regularly used, but things like Shredder and Knife Juggler are seen in virtually every game, and, well, I recorded 20 hours worth of footage in preparation for this video, and I'm not exaggerating when some crazy random event happened in almost every single one of them, as seen by my collected museum of bullshit here. The combination of all these random effects, class counters, draw curves, card outcomes, results in a game that often feels like it isn't being so much as played, but vaguely guided like it's a stubborn horse with dreams of its own. With every expansion released, each class is getting more and more tools. Decks are becoming more refined, and especially after the Grand Tournament, playing cards on a good curve has become more crucial than ever. The vast majority of my games were determined by whoever drew the better curve, to the point that in some matches against Dragon Priest and Secret Paladin, that I am absolutely certain that I still would have lost, even if I could have seen what cards they had in their hand. That's how powerful these decks can be when they play through their curve in the best way. This happens far more often than you'd think, or at least it happens to me. I've had losing streaks against multiple Secret Paladins in a row that felt like the same game on repeat. Turn 1 Noble Sacrifice, Turn 2 Shielded Minibot, Turn 3 Muster for Battle, Turn 4 Piloted Shredder, Turn 5 Coin Mysterious Challenger, or Turn 6 Challenger followed by Dr. Boom and Tyrion. If you're stuck with a bad curve, these games can feel like they're on autopilot. I wrote a story once about a man who lived in the future and made a bit of extra money by working as a video game villain. He would be paid to play as an NPC in games to give players the illusion of a challenge while always dying to make them feel like they accomplished something. Games can often feel like this in Hearthstone, that you are role-playing a bitch AI so the other player can enjoy himself. Sometimes you can put down a card and it really comes down to, does my opponent have an answer to this? And if the answer is no, because he simply hasn't drawn it, then you win. No interaction, no decision making, just chance dictating whether or not one player will win. Or you'll play a game against someone who will have answer after answer to every card you play, literally countering every move you make like he can magically summon any card he wants, resulting in you never being able to attack. It's for all of these reasons that I think patience is the most valued quality a Hearthstone player can have. The decisions you have to make every turn are rarely that mentally taxing, but justifying giving the game 100% effort every turn is, because you might lose to a Shredder popping at a Doomsayer after cornering your opponent, or a Ram Wrangler to spawn a 9/7 and then taunt it, or you might draw shit cards for the rest of the game. There are Hearthstone channels on YouTube devoted to just this sort of thing. Hearthstone is a game that you can make all the right decisions and still lose, or make all the wrong ones and still win. There was a chart posted in the Hearthstone community several months back that ranked a handful of games in terms of how much luck and skill they require. Chess and Hearthstone were put in equal levels for skill, but at opposite ends of the spectrum for chance. I personally think this is a grave insult to chess. There's a greater learning curve in Hearthstone, absolutely, but that's indicative of the amount of cards that a new player has to learn compared to the pieces on a chessboard. There's also the issue of learning from mistakes in Hearthstone, which can be surprisingly difficult or near impossible without watching streamers play the game on Twitch. By that I mean it could be hours and hours until you find yourself back in a similar situation that just taught you a lesson. In the most extreme examples, you could lose to a rogue or a shaman, and it could be more than 10 hours of playtime until you ever see another rogue or shaman ever again, and even then, there's no guarantee that they'll be playing the same deck or draw the same cards so you can use the knowledge you've learned. Hearthstone has the potential to have a high skill ceiling, but as the game is today, after you've learned all the cards and know what they all do, there is very little decision making, and most games are decided by luck. I'm not saying there is no decision making at all, and when it does come around, the game is fantastic, and I wish it was designed more around getting you into those situations like that instead of luck. The best argument I can make to support this are statements made from deck builders and those who analyze the game, some who do it literally for a living. Anything above a 55% win rate is considered decent. Above 60% is good, above 70% is godly. That's the state of the game. If you are winning 3 games for every 2 that you lose, you are doing well and playing the game right. There's no possible way that those numbers can support the idea that Hearthstone is about decision making. Some of these deck builders also make the funniest statements. X is a key card in this deck against X and Y matchups, so mulligan hard for it and make sure you draw it early, as if you have any control over that, and to cap it off, these key cards are usually a one-of because they're only good against certain decks. While listening to podcasts and reading the Hearthstone subreddit, I've heard it said by many people that they prefer watching the game rather than playing it, or that they can only play in small doses before they get frustrated, which isn't the best thing to say about a game. The conclusion made after these sorts of comments is that the game's focus on luck and a lack of viable decks is the reason why it can be so tiring to play. Let's talk a little about how that could be changed.
Guide my land. Loon, guide my land. Guide my land.
Mocking me.
Someone injured?
Mocking me. Mocking you. Mocking.
Injured? 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 Someone injured? Someone injured? Injured?
Mocking me.
Red alert! Red alert! Heels up! Red alert! Up! Red heels up! Red alert! Heels up! Shields off. Alert. Off. Red alert. Shields off. Red alert. Shields off. Red alert.
Side.
Show them.
Side. Side. Side.
I'll show them. I'll show them. I'll show them.
To side.
I'll
Side.
show them. Show them.
Side.
Show them. I'll show them. I'll show them.
To my side.
I'll show them.
To my side.
I mentioned it earlier, but some of you watching may still be thinking that this sort of luck-based gameplay is what card games are all about, and my response to that is twofold. Just because something is the accepted norm doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to do things, and Hearthstone isn't just a card game, it's also a video game. Blizzard could dramatically reduce the influence luck has on the game because a computer controls it all, including the order that cards are drawn. The game already utilizes the medium in order to make things happen that aren't really feasible for a traditional card game with physical cards and a rulebook played on a table. Minions like Shredder and Sky Golem, Spellslinger and Ram Wrangler, spells like Unstable Portal, effects like Mad Scientist. With a mediator for each game these could be done, but it's not really practical. The same goes for changing cards. In a physical card game, you can't make these sorts of changes once a card is printed. Blizzard has the luxury to change things, but they rarely do. In some cases they will use the electronic format, in others they won't experiment to find ways to make a game less determined by chance. Unfortunately, Blizzard's approach to these sorts of things is questionable at best. I brought up the example of Patron Warrior a while ago and how it was the best deck in the game for about 6 months. I want to clarify that it wasn't just a little better than the rest out there, nor was its reign ever really questioned by the top players who had made playing the game their jobs. For 6 months, Patron stayed on top and Blizzard continually denied the deck's power until recently, right before it was nerfed. I already spoke about some cards with their high potential for randomness, but they're also among some of the most unbalanced. Piloted Shredder is a meta-defining card that has had a huge impact on the way cards have been designed since then. A card with 4 health is vulnerable to Shredder, just like a 2-drop with 3 attack can kill a Shredder. Yet despite its presence in almost every deck, it still hasn't been nerfed. Dr. Boom, widely considered to be the best card, hasn't been nerfed after being in the game for 10 months. This card is also an example of some strange inconsistencies in power of certain cards. It costs 7 mana, so does War Golem, yet Dr. Boom is clearly twice as good. This would make a lot of sense if there was a hard limit on how many legendaries a deck could have, say 3, just as an example, so that the legendaries would then have to be chosen carefully and therefore deserve that huge boost in power, but the game isn't like that, so it makes you wonder why War Golem is even in the game at all. There are some weird instances of this even in class cards. Dark Bomb is just a worse version of Frostbolt, Wrath, and Quickshot. Mortal Strike is just a worse version of Fireball. Mysterious Challenger is the new overpowered card that will likely carry Secret Paladin through the next 3 to 6 months as a top deck instead of Patron Warrior before Blizzard finally nerfs it. I think how Blizzard lets these things sit for so long is a big mistake and that they don't react quickly enough. Let's use Patron as an example. Patron Warrior was named after a key card in its deck, Grim Patron. When this minion took damage but still survived, it would spawn another Grim Patron with full health, which could also spawn another Grim Patron if it was ever damaged. This could quickly spiral out of control into a full board of these minions. Grim Patron isn't a Warrior class card, but the other cards available only to Warrior combine to make the best combo deck that the game has ever seen. A card called Warsong Commander gives charge to any minion with 3 or less attack, meaning that every Grim Patron summoned could attack immediately, creating this feedback loop of minions being spawned. Another card, Frothing Berserker, could also be used in conjunction with all of these free Grim Patrons in order to create these high damage monsters, once again with charge. Players could win in 1 turn with this combo, even taking down their opponent from full health to 0 without them having a chance of responding. The deck was undoubtedly bullshit, but I have to respect its creation. In my opinion, its strength was never solely tied to the massive spike in damage it could pump out with Frothing. It was so strong because of its consistency. There was no bullshit RNG in the Patron deck. In fact, the whole deck was centered around normalizing any amount of chance that would interfere with winning. Let's have a look at the deck list. Every card falls into 3 categories: cheap removal, insane value card draw, or combo pieces. It's not perfect, but it's the closest I've ever seen a deck being to the idea, it doesn't matter what order I draw my cards in, I can win the game anyway. If you haven't drawn your combo pieces, that means by necessity that you have your card draw and removal instead. Removal will let you stall the game to draw more cards. If you have the combo pieces and nothing else, then you're already set to win the game. It really is beautiful in its own way, and the deck wasn't that easy to play either. I was pretty horrible with it myself. So after 6 months of everyone calling for Patron to be nerfed with many suggestions involving reducing the card draw the deck could have, or the power of Frothing Berserkers, Blizzard, after denying the deck strength for the whole time, made the change that Warsong Commander no longer gives charge and instead grants a +1 attack buff to minions that already have charge. To say that this was a reduce in power would be an understatement. The deck was completely killed, effectively deleted from the game. Warsong Commander, a warrior class card, is now objectively worse than Raid Leader, which is a neutral card. Many people have pointed this out and are upset that the nerf was so harsh that an interesting deck was removed instead of rebalanced to be fair, but playable. I agree with what I just said, but the more troubling thought I had to this nerf was, Blizzard kept claiming the deck was fine, and that players would find a way to adapt to beating it. It would make sense to me that the nerf should have been reluctant, and perhaps a mild one to reflect Blizzard's position over the last few months. Instead, they took off and nuked the deck from orbit, just to be sure. Ben Brode, the senior designer for Hearthstone, made a video in response to the community's reaction to the nerf. It was cool of him to do that and to explain himself. However, after watching it, I was left with far more doubts and questions than I had before going in. He made several statements that make me question if the Hearthstone team understands their own game. First off, he says that the change was made in part because it's not fun to play against a deck that can deal a massive amount of damage from their hand. A player can't react to this and instead has to play a guessing game or preparing for it ahead of time, which sort of describes a lot of the RNG problems the game has, but never mind about that. The issue here is that he's definitely correct. It isn't fun, but there are many key instances of this still existing. Warriors can still pull off huge damage combos through the Charge spell and Raging Worgens. The Druid Savage Nature combo does at least 14 damage, with far more if they have an Innervate, or if you have the audacity to ever leave them with a minion alive on the board. Freeze Mage can do high damage with their spells, or even normal mages with double Fireball. The entire Hunter class is built around dealing damage from their hand without interacting with the board or their opponent. The second troubling thing he said sounds reasonable at first, that Warsong Commander was causing them issues and limiting their freedom to design new cards, since the charge mechanic would always need to be in their mind so they don't make something that's broken. The problem is that they keep introducing new cards that have this same limitation. Mysterious Challenger means that Paladins can never get another good secret, or maybe never get another secret at all. Mad Scientist means that a new suite of secrets can never be given to another class, since it would be a gigantic bump in power. Warlocks can never be given another Great Demon card, like Doomguard, that has a huge battlecry drawback because of Voidcaller. The last thing he said is the most worrisome, that they don't like changing cards because it can be confusing to players who don't read patch notes. They've made similar statements in the past about not wanting to confuse players by adding more deck slots, and whining about this is understandable but overdone at this point. But it's still baffling that this excuse is always brought out as anything close to valid, that they want to avoid players feeling bad and or confused when they queue into a game and find that one of their cards has been changed. The issue here is the alternative. Instead of catering to those who like the game and will read the changes or will check the announcements before logging in, Blizzard is worried about how a player will react to losing one game in order to learn that a change is being made. This will, at worst, be about 10 minutes of someone's time. But to avoid that, the unbalanced cards will remain active for months and months, sticking out as problems to those who play regularly, just to avoid this minor inconvenience that Joe Casual might experience. The easy workaround for this is an announcement box that could pop up over the main menu after loading into the game and won't vanish until you hit an OK prompt that you read it. But Blizzard isn't even consistent about this sort of thing, since adding new class skins to the game, which could legitimately appear as a new, different class to some players the first time they see them, is all well and good. It must be a coincidence that this is also a feature that earns them money. Warsong Commander was still nerfed harder than anyone called for, which also makes no sense if a lesser nerf would have alleviated whatever confusion they wanted to avoid. This suspicion has been building in me for a while, since the release of Blackrock Mountain actually, that Blizzard doesn't really know what to do with their game. Rogue and Shaman still don't have a truly viable deck. Priest only recently got one. Blackrock Mountain was clearly trying to make Dragon decks a thing, and it took a whole other expansion release for them to finally make a good one, and even then, it's only one. There's only one real good mech deck in the game, there's no strong Pirate or Murloc one, the Joust mechanic is dead on arrival, and its Spire fell flat on its face, acting more as battle cries that cost 2 mana than anything else. It would seem best if the game received smaller, incremental changes to balance rather than gigantic nerfs to specific cards, but honestly, I can't really blame them. Hearthstone is absurdly popular, and may very well be one of the most overanalyzed games currently out there. The amount of guides and articles and discussion on the metagame is staggering, along with hundreds of people streaming the game on Twitch at any time of the day or night. Changing the game is daunting, which is probably why so many of the new cards are garbage. Out of the 132 cards released in the Grand Tournament, are there even more than 20 seeing regular play? Is it even less than that? There are a lot of interesting ideas brought by the expansion, but the cards are generally so weak that they don't get a chance to be considered. If Blizzard was more willing to make changes, wouldn't it be better if the cards were tuned to be on the stronger side so people are encouraged to experiment, and then bring the most prominent ones down slightly so now they're balanced, while still bringing in a bunch of fresh new decks to the game? An example of this being done to an existing card, Piloted Shredder could be made into a 3-3, or a 4-2 to be more in line with Piloted Skygolem stats, or it could spawn a 1-mana minion instead of a 2-mana. Or you could remove the extra minion spawn idea completely, and instead make it grant +1 attack to every minion with charge. I think the game could greatly benefit by tapping into the resource that is the players and the deck builders who have made the game their jobs. An extra ladder could be run every month to test small changes to the game. A whole month for them to see how little tweaks could work. Like, how about cards that are mulliganed away go to the bottom of your deck instead of randomly inserted? This adds a level of decision making. Is this an improvement to the game? No idea, but put it on the test ladder for a month and see what the pros think. Or smaller ideas like this could be given a week to test. Is one card causing trouble? Nerf it on the test ladder and see what the response is. How about if you have a 1-drop, it's guaranteed to be in your opening hand to smooth out RNG? Is that a good thing for the game? I don't think anyone could outright say for sure or not, so let's test it out. Or test how having a maximum sum of all mana in your opening hand feels so that you can't get stuck with no cards to play for the first 3 turns. Add 10 to player health to see if that's a good change or not. Does that solve aggro decks? Does that make the game more enjoyable? I honestly have no idea, but what if it does, and that's a simple change to make? Joust could be changed from mana cost so that a player can never win 2 in a row, so there can be a trade-off strategy to it. Or that the player with the higher average cost always wins, so you can really commit to the idea and be rewarded. Let's flat out remove the overload penalty from Shaman cards, since they're like the shittiest class in the entire game, and see if that simple fix makes them playable. Have a month with a pre-made deck for each class that's actually balanced against all the others, and if Blizzard is incapable of doing this, then maybe that should be a lesson for them that there's something wrong with their game. Maybe these ideas are shit. Maybe you're sitting there shaking your head going, Joe, you have no idea what you're talking about, and that's sort of my point. I don't, but neither does Blizzard. Too many of the changes they've made have had no impact on the game, and even the professional players can't accurately predict how cards will act when they go live.
Got the Hungry Dragon. It's 4 for a 5/6, which is basically as good as any other 4-drop in terms of stats, and it has the battle cry to summon a random 1-cost minion for your opponent. So, yeah, this is really broken.
Mysterious Challenger, an interesting card. I'm going to say it has potential, but I'm actually not even going to put it in the good category. It does have 6 mana, 6/6, but I just don't see the secrets being worth running just so you can get the Mysterious Challenger out.
There are going to be better late game legendaries than Dr. Boom, and I wouldn't anticipate seeing much of Dr. Boom in Constructed.
Come on, you did me twice.
There are so many ways that Blizzard could refine their game using their players as a resource while also taking advantage of the electronic format. And it needs to be something players can actually test, since every expansion proves time and time again that just looking and thinking about cards isn't enough to accurately predict how good they're going to be.
Probably like the most exciting card they revealed. And for good reason. This is actually one of the rare times that a card that looks broken is legitimately broken. This card legitimately looks insane because it is. This might be so powerful that it just becomes the new form of Hunter. And the lock and load lists, just to put it in perspective, will look very different from standard Hunter.
So why not make a boiling pot league, throw some ideas in there, and see what comes out of spaghetti? Here's an example I just saw. Brian Kibler of Brian Kibler Gaming wrote an article about how he thinks silence is bad for the game, and that he'd rather have cards built to address specific minion abilities rather than the ones that can remove any spell effect. I hate cards like that. I think they have a negative impact on the game and lead to more guesswork than anything else. Or this tug-of-war style, say, with Kazan Mystic, where everyone will be playing Secrets so everyone runs Mystic. So the Secrets go away, so now Mystic is useless. So the Mystics get taken out of the decks and now the Secrets come back, and the whole cycle repeats. But I'm nowhere near confident enough in my opinion to not want to try Kilber's idea out. Maybe it would be fantastic for the game. He is one of the best players, and he's one of my favorite streamers. The game suffers heavily from Blizzard unable to decide what they want Hearthstone to be. By that I mean rush decks versus control decks. If they want players to be fighting over the board and winning games like that, then they need to stop incentivizing quick games. Climbing up the ladder already takes too long as it is, and with win rates being determined more by RNG and anything above 60% being considered good, it's more appealing to play faster decks for more games in a shorter period. Same goes for quest rewards and the gold reward you get for every 3 wins. There are so many reasons to play the faster decks. It should be clear that they want players to fight over the board and win games like that, yet Hunter is still in the game as it is today. Not only that, but they keep adding new cards that reward hunters for using cheap cards and dumping their whole hands as quickly as possible. They're refining Face Hunter, the deck that epitomizes the concept of ignoring the board completely and trying to rush your opponent down. If they want to control heavy meta, why is the Hunter hero power still the same way it is today? Why does an entire class sit in proud contrast to what Blizzard allegedly wants their game to be, all the while inspiring imitation aggro decks like Paladins who can refill their hands with Divine Favor? Expanding on that, hero powers also limit what changes can be brought into the game. Anytime a rogue has a weapon equipped, their hero power is dead, so adding new and interesting weapons to the class and expansions that take advantage of all their cards that buff weapon damage isn't as simple a decision as it should be. I know I just mentioned it, but it's hard to justify ever playing anything other than an aggro deck in Hunter because the hero power is useless in a control deck. The most extreme example of this is probably Warlock. In certain situations, every hero power can really shine, but I think it's undeniable that, when talking in general terms, that Warlock has the best hero power in the game. It's what allows them to have so many different viable decks, because whether it's aggro, control, or combo, being able to draw more cards cheaply and consistently lowers the chances of you ever being draw fucked by RNG. If the game is meant to be about value, using your cards and mana wisely in order to maximize their effectiveness, then having a class that can just continually draw more cards shatters any chance of balancing this. It's why many of the Warlock cards are sort of bad when you look at them on their own, or how the Grand Crusade basically gave them nothing new to work with. It feels like Blizzard is trapped trying to serve two masters. Aggro decks are some of the cheapest around, and although it can feel so righteous to hate on the face hunter who chants faces the place all the way to legend, these kinds of decks are the only option for people who are new and haven't dumped a lot of money into the game. These need to be viable. It's also why priests are so frustrating to new players. Yet long-term players tend to prefer controlling expensive decks, and it should make sense that the more expensive deck that took a longer amount of time to make should be better, right? In most cases it is, but the aggro deck still needs to be viable. So you have old players hating on the aggro-centric meta that ruins the fun, the way that they see the game was meant to be played, and you have the new players hating on older ones who have all of the epics and legendaries that they don't. Speaking as someone who doesn't have every card, and 6 months ago barely had any legendaries at all, I can tell you that it's extremely frustrating to lose to a card that you don't have. And I don't mean that you don't have it in your deck, you don't have it in your collection at all. The cynic in me thinks this is intentional. There aren't many legendaries in the game that have that wow factor, but when you're new, cards like Sylvanas, Ragnaros, Dr. Boom, Tyrion, Mal'Ganis, and Tinnitus, these are the cards that used to make me yell, "Oh fuck you buddy," at the screen when I was playing the Mech Mage deck that I barely scraped together without a single legendary to cap out the curve. Wallet Warrior, a deck that I now love to play, even though I'm still missing Ysera, is the most frustrating thing in the world as a new player. It got to the point when I was new that after turn 5 I used to sit and wonder why I was even playing as the warrior put down Sylvanas into Baron Geddon, into Dr. Boom, into Ragnaros, into Grommash. It was insane. But solving this problem is another way that Blizzard is trying to service two masters, the players and Blizzard's profits. Because the game would unquestionably be better if it had an entrance fee in line with StarCraft II or World of Warcraft. The base game is X dollars, here are all the cards. An expansion just came out, pay X dollars for that set. You could still have the fun of getting gold and opening packs to get golden cards that can't be purchased, and now there's an even playing field, but then Blizzard can't enjoy the insane amount of money that people have to drop to complete their sets, which totals up to far, far, far more than a base entry price for their other games. I said the cynic in me thinks that a legendary effect is intentional, that "oh fuck you" response that tempts you into purchasing a bunch of packs so you can get that very card that just made you lose, so now you're even. Free-to-play games with microtransactions like this have a reputation for bringing out destructive, addictive behavior in people. I'm not trying to say that it's Blizzard's responsibility to help the minority of people who have impulse control problems, but they're definitely not showing any generosity when it comes to new releases in Hearthstone. The adventure expansions are shockingly devoid of content compared to their other titles. It takes an absurd amount of money to buy every card in the larger expansions, not to mention the cosmetic portraits that don't even change the class's base cards to suit their theme. Even if they went through and changed how each card looked to match the new portraits, I still think $10 for this shit when you already need to spend real money to get enough cards is disgusting to the point of being a sick parody of other freemium titles. Then there are golden cards, which make me question the sanity of any player I come across who has a full golden set. Sometimes I see Wallet Warriors with every card golden and I just have to wonder how much money Blizzard has milked from these people. Streamers tie into this. The game is their job, and getting golden cards through that is sort of unavoidable. When you play the game so much and have a following, it might even be cool for your audience. But the average player? I wonder how much streamers have an influence on how much money people pour into the game. The $25 adventures don't even give you the golden cards for completing the challenges on heroic mode, which would seem to be a perfect thematic fit to go with the normal cards for normal mode, because it's another way to squeeze more money out of the player base. I have to wonder if everyone at Blizzard is on board with this, or if there's the business end of the Hearthstone team that has the goal to real money app open every meeting and is constantly doing feverish calculations to make sure the delicate balance that is $1.50 per 5 cards is never being disturbed, because that's the standard everything needs to be rigidly set by, or else the whole game comes crumbling down. There are a couple of loose details that I couldn't find a way to fit organically into the rest of the video. Who the fuck is Light's Champion for? Why was this card ever printed? It only makes sense to put in a Warlock deck so they could silence the detrimental effect of their own demon, but so many of those drawbacks are battle cries that it's useless. Why are new cards being made that are just better versions of old cards? This sets an uncomfortable precedent if Blizzard ever decides to do some sort of overarching power adjustment in the future by releasing a whole set of new cards instead of tweaking existing ones. It feels like another excuse to squeeze more money by deleting the card pool. They recently had to do a power crunch in World of Warcraft when the numbers got too high. If that ever happens in Hearthstone, I would like to think that they would change all the cards rather than just releasing a whole new set that you need to buy, but the fact that they printed these cards makes me really nervous about that. Trying to get to Legend for this video was one of the most tedious, useless things I have ever done with my life, and that includes going to university for a liberal arts degree and trying to teach a cat how to shit in a toilet. Getting 5 stars only to queue into the class that counters you 3 times in a row and then into a secret paladin with a perfect curve happened so much that I gave up even with a 56% win rate. Why can't you continue getting win streaks to high levels? Or how about you can't lose a rank but still lose stars so it alleviates the insane losing streaks you can go on sometimes when queuing into decks that counter you over and over? Or how about you just can't lose stars at all, because even if you win all the way up to the top, it's still an insane amount of games, and there's a ranking system at Legend anyway, so why not just make this a grind that people can play with any deck that they want? Why is it possible to rope every turn just to fuck with your opponent? There should be a max time limit for each match like in timed games of chess to prevent this horseshit. That people can waste each other's time like this with no recourse is insulting. In an ideal world, each class would have 4 or more viable decks, and I do mean viable, equally, competitively viable, a mech deck, and a dragon deck, and a rush aggro deck, and a control deck, and maybe an inspire deck, or some weird fun combo deck. If this amount of balance and care went into the game, with tweaks happening regularly and a lot of thought and planning going into new cards, then suddenly the cost of these packs and expansions is looking pretty good.
But it turns out it's pretty good.
The game wouldn't need such a heavy reliance on RNG if this was the case, since the amount of varied balanced decks provides way more differences in matches. Why can you get the same cards back that you just mulliganed away? It's a computer game. Why isn't that hard-coded as impossible? And I think that wraps it up. In closing, I want to say that I'm disappointed that the game has so many issues. Unless substantial changes are made, and not necessarily ones I suggested, just something that adds more variety and less chance, then I am done with Hearthstone. I am thoroughly sick of playing something that's the video game equivalent of a slot machine, both in how it plays and the money it wants from you. I hope that Hearthstone's payment model isn't transferred to Blizzard's other games, although I have my worries about Diablo after seeing Overwatch and Heroes in the Storm. World of Warcraft is one of my favorite games of all time, and it's not fun in the slightest to see a developer I respect switch gears into money raking as hard as Blizzard has these past 2 years. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think. If you like videos like this that go into detail on games, then you should hit the subscribe button. I'm hoping my next video will be on the new Anno game or Fallout 4, and then on to Dark Souls 2 after that. Thanks again.